when our mind, which is a computer, is running the same script over and over because it relied on it from a very young age. And those can be very bad messages, but if they kept you alive at 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, and they're now outdated, they're in conflict with your soul, with the way that God has designed for you to live.
When times get tough, you need to get down. No need to look backward, put your feet on the ground. Stand up, stand up.
Welcome to The Fallen State. I am Jesse Lee Peterson. The Fallen State is on Subscribe Star. So hit the Subscribe Star link in the description to support our work, all right? I do appreciate it. I have with me a very interesting guest today, Aryn Elaine. And Aryn is a medical intuitive healer. Aryn, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
I do appreciate it.
I appreciate you.
So, what is a medical intuitive?
Well, a medical intuitive is an individual who can sense, typically within their body, somatic feelings and sensations that would connect to a root cause of another person's illness. So for example, if you've got a broken leg, a medical intuitive will usually feel that, like in their own leg, or they'll feel that the cause of what happened to cause that broken leg, if that makes sense. I know that's very esoteric.
So are you saying that you could be in the room with someone that has a medical illness happening and you can feel the pain, their pain?
You can feel the pain somatically, and you can also pick up on what caused that.
Really?
Yes.
And so if a person has a broken leg, without speaking to the person, you can feel the pain of the broken leg and you know what happened to cause it.
Yes. And generally, there's a predisposition around an emotional conflict in their life that's contributed to that. So perhaps if it's on the left side, that constitutes a feminine energy. On the right side, it constitutes a masculine energy. So very often when someone has left side injuries, there is a conflict actively or an unresolved conflict with a feminine energy. Could be mother, wife, coworker, but every time it's drilled back to a specific relationship and unresolved spiritual conflict, but people aren't looking beyond what is, so it's really hard to communicate to people.
And so you can pick that up from a stranger.
Yeah.
And can you give me an example of someone you've helped in that way?
Yes. So one session, and sessions are what I call them, prior to the session, I had a lot of trouble breathing. And my rule for working with individuals is I know nothing about them. I don't want to know their name, their occupation, why they're seeing me. And that's the disclaimer on my site. So I had someone coming to see me. And prior to the session, even hours prior, I felt a pneumonia, a bronchitis, incredible trouble breathing. This is many years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Right. I almost canceled the session, but something said to me, move through it, you'll be okay. 5 minutes prior to the session, I felt restored, I felt normal. The person showed up, and long story short, they had been on a respirator for decades to sleep. They had so much trouble breathing. There was an apnea issue, and it was all within that lung structure. So we sat down and went through some personal details from the past, and they were able to immediately make a connection to something very emotional and very repressed within their private biological circle. And the moment that they made that connection, they were breathing differently, and they never needed the respirator again. So often, well, I would say all the time, we have major spiritual problems that contribute to psychological and emotional problems that then move into the body. But we're not making these associations because it sounds a little crazy.
So do you heal the psychological problem or the physical problem of the person?
We go straight to the root, and the root is always a spiritual problem first.
Right.
And then we move into the emotional and the psychological. But I have to tap into the emotional and the psychological to open up their availability to spiritual understanding, because many people are not. But then they start to make that connection, and when the soul and the mind connect, then the body responds.
And so the body, once you deal with the psychological issues, emotion and stuff like that, and they have a physical broken leg, for an example, will that heal the broken leg too?
Very often.
It does heal the body?
Yes.
And so you've dealt with people like that had broken bones, and you dealt with their psychological issues, and their bones came back together?
Many times. I had a woman reach out to me years ago. She'd read the prerequisite books that I have listed, and I said, "You can't tell me why you're calling," and she kept calling. I went to see her, and she said, "Can I please tell you why you're here?" I said, "No, we spoke for a few hours." And then she told me, "I have stage 4 cancer. I have a short time to live." And I started to laugh because I knew it wasn't true. And then she started to laugh. And in those 3 hours preceding that, we had made a million connections to different psychological hang-ups and boxes that she had stored different experiences in relative to very important relationships in her life.
Right.
1 month later, she flew to New York to see her oncologist. And they said, "I don't know what you did. You're fine." She wrote about it. She left me voicemails about it. So these are just very strange acts of God, but God communicates in
And
this
so
way.
that person will heal the cancer once you dealt with all that?
She healed herself by making these spiritual connections to her emotional and psychological state, and then making the corresponding changes in her life, because changes have to be made.
Right.
We're lazy. We don't like to make changes, so we stay rooted in our illnesses.
What would be the cause of a person out working, a contractor, out working, and that contractorship fall off a building or something, or accidentally cut their hand with a saw thing that they're using? What would that have to do with mommy issues?
It would seem haphazard, but when we're out of balance, mentally, emotionally, and then physically, that physical body is actually speaking to everything that's going on for us in an intangible sense. So depending on what side of the body that injury was sustained, you could almost, I have always drawn it back to a male or female energy that is out of whack in their life. And it is God's way of saying, there's something you need to pay attention to. But the majority of the population wouldn't see it that way. They'd think it's crazy.
What's the difference between a male energy and a female energy?
Well, it shows up in the body differently, at least for me. This is how I've always connected to it, and I think others do as well. That left side is female, and that right side is male. I don't know if I've answered your question, though.
But how can you detect which energy you're dealing with?
When I feel it on the left side, I know it's female. And so I'll go immediately into a corresponding relationship in their life.
Do women have male energy?
Yes, we all have a balance of male and female. It depends on how we balance that and the people that we interact with.
So I read that you deal with a lot of what they call high-end clients, right?
Some.
What type of individuals do you deal with?
All kinds of individuals. I don't know that I could specify a specific group, but I have seen everybody from C-suites of major corporations to students that are working really hard to take care of the session with me.
Why do you think people trust you with this?
I think it's my writing. So I had started a blog when I first began. I had no picture of my face, nothing. Everything was blank. I wanted a blank slate
Right.
to not be judged, no associations.
Right.
And so people would read the things that I was writing about. And there's energy in what we write about. You know, you can feel the intention, I think. And so I've had some folks say, I read one of your articles, I need to see you tomorrow, and demanding, doing whatever it takes. There's an intangible connection that we share through communications. And I think that the blog is the overwhelming, if not maybe the only reason people have seen me.
Oh, I see. And do they typically see you in private? They say, hey, keep my name private. Don't tell anyone?
Half of the time, yes.
And why would they want to keep it private?
So a lot of these folks are on Wall Street, they're physicians, they are well-known public figures, and I think it rocks two things. I think it rocks the boat for them in terms of judgment. I mean, this is obviously a very out there practice.
Right.
So that's one, and I think two, there is a sacred space around that type of work,
Right.
and we have a web of thought and a web of consciousness. And so some people might call that an evil eye, call it what you like, but if we are in a vulnerable state and we've got consciousness from other people coming in and imparting their own thoughts or will, it can feel very sensitive until that healing is complete.
So you've had doctors come to you for healing?
Absolutely.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Are you surprised by that?
Initially, 10 or 12 years ago, I was, but it was so common and it just kept happening over and over and over and over. And the individuals I see are really intelligent people, maybe too intelligent for their own good in some cases.
And do you work alone?
Yes.
How did you get into this healing,
So
intuitive healing?
I have always had this connection, but I took a very traditional route. I went to Northeastern University in Boston, studied journalism and modern language, and was on a business track. And every job I had, I was just overwhelmingly sensitive to the environment. I did a brief stint on television as an actress to try to break out and get comfortable with that energy because I knew it was leading somewhere public. But after that, my life just seemed to stop, really stop. I couldn't find a job. I couldn't find a corporate job. I sat for about a year or two sending out resumes from coffee shops, and nobody wanted me. I looked for dog walking jobs. I looked for waitressing jobs.
You couldn't even get a dog walking job?
I'm telling you nothing. I actually littered downtown Manhattan with paper posters of my face and my resume looking for a job. People didn't believe me as to what was happening. And I had an expensive studio in the East Village of Manhattan and a roommate living in my kitchen at the time. And this is after being successful in corporate, being successful on television. Guest starring, I think, is successful without a heavy background in acting. So there were crickets, and I was broke. And I would just sit and pray. I had no television. And God said to me, not audibly, no hallucinations, if you don't go share what I have given you with other people, I'm not going to let you eat again. You won't eat, you won't have a place to live, go do it. And at the time I had a friend who kept telling me, you need to help people, and I didn't know what to call it.
Right.
So I called it Reiki, but I just put my business on the map.
You call it what?
I called it Reiki.
Oh.
And that's not what I would call
Right.
what I do, but there was no other term that I felt would communicate to the masses accordingly. And once I set up a simple Yelp page and put my website on the map, calls started rolling in. When I say the lights came on, they came on fast and furiously. And I was, hands down, bar none, the busiest healer in New York City, and it just never stopped. It was a night and day switch from listening to that calling, which I was, averted to, because it's such a weird thing.
So you have this energy inside of you as well. Prior to recognizing the call, you said you had an energy within you, something trying to warn you or something? Is that right?
Well, like being a child and being really sensitive, I always had that. But prior to that call, nothing else was working, and I knew
see.
what I was, I knew I was capable of helping other human beings, but I didn't know how to quantify it, and I hadn't read the Bible in a long time, so I wasn't making any associations to anything mystical or religious.
Oh, I see. So are you able to heal yourself?
Well, that's always the hardest part, right? We can help other people, but we would cease to exist if we had all of the answers. The point of living is to live in contrast and expand. But I could answer a more specific question about healing myself.
When you say live in contrast, what do you mean?
Well, contrast is, being a human being versus our soul being, which is connected to God, so it's all-knowing.
Right.
So we're dropped into these bodies, and we're given these lessons that we repeatedly have to learn. And if we had all of the answers, there would be no point in living. So we all live in a degree of contrast.
Have you ever healed yourself of a disease or a broken bone or anything like that?
I can't think of anything that I've really ever had to heal within myself.
So you've not been sick or anything since discovering this?
Nothing substantial. I did have a broken toe. When I first started this practice, I dropped a piece of furniture on it. And I didn't want to see a doctor. I just kept it elevated. I did get x-rays. I don't know if I healed that. It's still a little crooked, but that's
amazing.
Yeah.
Are you concerned that if you can heal yourself or not? Does that cross your mind, or are you concerned about that?
I don't have fear of getting sick or injured or anything. I feel like it's always in God's hands, and our conscious awareness of where we are at, I think psychologically, spiritually, and emotionally is the most important. So if I focus on that, everything else is divine.
And define conscious awareness for me.
Conscious awareness is a state of living in self-truth. We can lie to ourselves, but God knows we're lying. And unconsciously, we know we're lying. And so when we remove whatever that block of fear is that causes us to lie, we are in a conscious state of awareness. It's not a psychological conscious state of awareness where people go to yoga and they get present. That's not consciousness.
Right.
Consciousness is a spirit of truth, and it's a soul consciousness that we then allow into our body.
And have you always had that?
The awareness?
Yes.
Perhaps. I
But
mean,
you were not aware that you had the awareness.
I was never aware that I had the awareness, and it got me into a lot of trouble as a child.
Can a person be aware that they have the awareness?
Potentially, but I think that there are a number of hard knocks that take place first to bring you into awareness of your awareness.
And when you say hard knocks, you mean what?
Difficulties in life,
I see.
tribulations. I think that if you are given a certain archetype of soul consciousness, there are hoops you need to jump through to become aware of that. Otherwise, you think you're just like everyone else. But that's where the hurdles come in, and it's not a better than. It's just it's a different way of living. It's a different predisposition to so-called consciousness.
Can other people or have other people recognize the consciousness in you
We always seem
without you having to mention it?
We always recognize one another. I can walk down the street and I'll make eye contact with someone. They'll make eye contact with me. We will stop almost without words. There's an exchange and then maybe a conversation. And that has happened my whole life. It could be any. I actually, the bus driver taking me from LAX on the shuttle, they do the shuttles now to the taxi.
Right.
She and I mean, this was midnight last night, 1 a.m. when my flight got in, an immediate connection. And it was just, I can feel it like through my heart. It's a very warm feeling and sensation.
And did you guys look at each other and go, praise the Lord?
We didn't say it, but I think we said it.
Really?
It was just
That's
it's a
interesting.
soul recognition. It is, devoid. That's why I strip everybody of their human container, their background, their occupation. I don't want to know anything. I want to feel who and what you are. It's very different from looking through human eyes.
Amazing. Do you ever doubt this yourself about this?
No, and it's gotten me into trouble when I do doubt it. And so that's why I don't, but it's a very strange thing to continuously trust.
And why, if you're conscious of it, right, why would it be dangerous to trust it? Why would you ever have doubt?
Because we're outnumbered. If you have a predisposition to this other sensation, and 99.9% of the individuals around you don't process things in the same way, and I want to make it really clear, it's not a hierarchy of any sort. It's just a different predisposition to interpreting, life on Earth. But consistently, I think we're outnumbered in terms of intuiting or seeing or feeling the world in this way. So if I'm walking around and 99 people are interacting with me on one level, and then the bus driver is not, she's that reminder to me that there's a different way to see things and to feel things, and that trust moves in as a feeling and emotion in my body. But when you're consistently faced with a different consciousness or a different truth, day to day, as a human being, your mind registers that on a loop, and that it runs in conflict with your soul, I think.
So when your family, when you saw this bus driver last night, and you guys looked at each other and you knew what was going on,
Yeah.
did you say anything to each other?
We had small talk, but it was
Like verbally?
yeah, but it was almost like I would just speak to a friend, just incredible ease, and I know you energy. And she erupted with a huge smile, as did I. I think we were both dead tired.
1
being
o'clock in the morning, huh?
it was the last. She said, "This is my last drop off,"
Yeah.
and I couldn't wait to get to my hotel. So
So would you call this energy God?
it's a God energy.
Is there a Satan energy as well?
Oh, there's a huge Satan energy.
And what is described as Satan energy?
It's everything that God isn't. It's an opposition to all that is peaceful, all that is neutral within our mind, body, and spirit. It needs a home. Satanic energy, demons, they desperately need housing. And they need tangible housing. So if we are souls and bodies, that demonic energy will look for openings. And there are various ways that we can create openings for this energy.
Amazing. And so have you ever been attacked by a devil energy in someone else? They saw you, or you didn't really know them, or
100%.
in the same room? Or...
100%. In fact, they'll seek you out. And they like to go to church, too.
I bet.
Best way to find the devil is within a church,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
That is how I met the first person that I would call a complete, they'd made a complete contract with the devil.
And they attacked you?
They sure did.
And what did they do?
Well, they befriended me. And being young and being in a church and not really knowing, not expecting the devil to live in a church, I guess, at that age. This is right before I started my work. I befriended this person, and there was almost a possessive feeling, almost a feeling of not only being watched, but also that they had some kind of control over, where I wanted to be or when I wanted to see them, things of that nature. And it was like a false positive spiritual energy, almost an intoxicating energy that felt abnormal. And I did pick up on that. So as I pulled away, the devil got like crazy, very overactive. And I later learned that they were a disciple of a self-proclaimed witch.
Wow.
who would work in Manhattan and go to these spiritual meetups, New Age spiritual meetups in New York City. And they're everywhere. They're rampant. People have no idea what's going on.
Amazing. What you do, are you ever called New Age? New Age?
I'm sure I was called New Age, especially when I started
Yeah.
and not knowing what to call this. You know, innocently using the word Reiki. And again, I never completely identified with that. I took one Reiki 1 training. I didn't get my master's, nothing
Right.
like that. I am fairly certain
And you say Ricky?
Reiki, R-E-I-K-I, it's a
Oh.
Japanese energy healing. So I'm sure, the Christian Bible thumpers,
What do your family think of you?
I don't know that they understand my work at all.
How
I
about-
think it's a hard thing to understand.
Even your parents?
I think it's a very foreign concept for anybody who's not predisposed to this
Right.
or very active in the church even.
Would this be the same as believing in God? Do you believe in God?
Absolutely.
You believe in Him.
Since I was little,
And how do you know you believe in Him completely?
100%. It's absolutely.
So how do you know you believe in Him completely?
When I was little and I'd be in a church or, really difficult situation, as I always found myself in as a young child, with no one to, protect or soothe. You have 2 places to go in those moments. You can psychologically split, and that's where mental illness comes in, because mental illness is designed to protect you in situations where you're not protected. Or if you're very lucky, you can merge with God. And that's what I always did. So that was my sanctuary, like my safety zone,
When you were little.
when I was little, from as little as I can remember.
So what do your father and mother say about what you do? They say what?
She helps
Like,
people.
oh.
I don't know. She's crazy.
Oh, yeah?
I don't know that anybody who's not, close to God in this, or the metaphysical world in this way, would
Do
understand.
you feel alone?
When?
Like you're all alone in this?
A lot of the time, yes, because even in communicating to other people, I'm sure the bus driver would understand.
Right.
But yeah, there's a general sense of aloneness.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You have a book, an ebook called "There's No Shortcut of an Ego." What do you mean by that?
Well, when our mind, which is a computer, is running the same script over and over because it relied on it from a very young age, and those can be very bad messages, but if they kept you alive at 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, and they're now outdated, they're in conflict with your soul, with the way that God has designed for you to live. And there's a dissonance between the two when the pressure gets really intense between your way of thinking and what is healthy and true, that consciousness that comes from that intangible space.
Right.
There's an eruption, and you can't avoid it if it's predestined for you. And I do believe that God has certain destinies for each of us. And if your destiny is over here, and that destiny requires you to abort a certain way of thought, and God is moving you here no matter what, God will cripple your life to make sure that you abort that thought and merge with the consciousness that's been designed for you.
Amazing. So the ego, is it a thought or is there something else going on too?
It's a pattern of thought.
And does feeling come with the ego?
Feeling?
Like sadness,
Thoughts
worry,
produce feelings.
fear.
We always think before we feel.
Right, I noticed that. All thoughts, all lies, all the time?
Are thoughts lies all the time? It depends. If it's an unhealthy ego pattern, it's probably a lie if it's causing you strife.
Is it possible to have a good thought?
Yes.
And how would you know when you have a good thought, since the devil is so deceiving? And how would you know if you have a good thought?
A good thought is devoid of attachment. So if I have a thought about something, it's a good thought, but it's a neutral thought. Negative thoughts come with a tremendous amount of attachment and compulsion, almost.
Attachment meaning what?
Attachment to outcome, attachment to what surrounds that thought.
Oh, I see. So if you think of a beautiful home, and if you attach yourself to that, get a sense of identity from it, then that's a bad thought.
If that's your source of identity versus just joy that might, neutrally come from a series of actions.
Right.
It's how you feel, and it's what emphasis, it's the reason why. Why do we want or need certain things?
Do human beings create their own thoughts?
Absolutely.
And how do human beings do that exactly?
Starts when we're little. So whatever we're around programs us like a computer. And when those computer systems, that hard drive starts to short circuit because it's not lining up with our destiny, which is part of our soul and our consciousness, that's when the trouble ensues. And that's often when people have injuries, illnesses, and so forth.
So if human beings create their own thoughts, why don't they always create good thoughts?
Because the ego runs on only what it knows, and you can't beat the mind.
Meaning what? I don't quite understand it. If we're in charge of the thoughts ourselves, for me, I would never create anything but a good thought, something that is positive, quote unquote, or I would never create a thought that would make me feel bad or make me worry or cause me to be sad or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So if human beings, I'm in control of my own thought, wouldn't I avoid all that?
Well, you have access to consciousness. So when somebody has a repetitive thought that they've been trained on from a very young age, it's at war with their consciousness, which is what you're describing as creating your own thoughts. So it does take a lot of work, but that's what an ego death is. So absolutely, that ego death can bring you to the next space where you become aware of your own control over your thoughts. But because the mind is such a computer, it's designed to keep you alive with any thought that was there to serve you. It could be a terrible thought. It could be, I need to rob this bank. This is how my family survived. I have to do this. I have to do this.
And so should we die of the thought? Because, you talk about the ego death. You said there is no shortcut out of a dark night of the soul. Mm-hmm. It's the dark night of the soul. That's the ego?
That comes after the ego death, and it's a period of time, I don't know, maybe you've experienced this, where it's just blank, and you almost feel that God is absent, and it's a testament, I think, of faith, that no matter, even if nothing is happening, something is happening, but you don't have any proof.
So the ego is a death that we have to go through too, right?
Yes.
And then after that death, there's another dark period?
There can be, not all the time.
And so sometimes there could not be?
Correct.
And you're just with the light?
Correct.
I
It's
see.
haphazard. It's luck of the draw.
And so make it clear as to how do people let an ego die? How do you let that happen? How should one let that happen?
So when those thoughts that have been running in your mind no longer work, and you are met with obstacles because of that, there's a feeling state that you have to move into to basically go against the adrenaline that runs from the ego into the body that says you will die if you change your thought. So you have to, in a sense, face death by going against what that ego is telling you and sit with that tremendous fear and consider the fact that whatever beliefs I have been running on do not serve me, because that ego will send adrenaline to the body that says you will die if you think differently. And you must sit there and feel as though you are dying. It's a very internal feeling, but we're so resistant to that.
What does it feel like?
Utter aloneness, absence, everything around you changes, your friends change, your jobs change, your community might change to accommodate what's on the other side of that computer program ego that's been running for so long.
Yeah.
So there's a real sense of alone.
I talk to a lot of people now because I talk about the ego and the ego death. And so I talk to a lot of men and women who are allowing that to happen. And they talk about how difficult it is, how painful they can barely move, or they feel like crying at time, or they don't know what to do. And is that what you're explaining as well?
There's a sense of nothingness and
Yeah.
confusion. It's a blank state. Take everything you think you know, move it out of the way, and then what do you have?
Everyone has told me, those who are going through this have told me that they've lost their friends, they've lost family members, they've lost things as a result. Why do they have to lose something in order to die from the ego?
It's physics. So two objects, two individuals have to vibrate at a very similar frequency in order to share space. And emotional and psychological thought is so powerful that when you shift that, everything else around you shifts.
Yeah.
And it happens to be people. So it's a wild phenomenon. I've gone through this several times now.
The one thing I've noticed about dying from the ego is that you lose that attachment to friends, people, places, and things
Yeah.
that you didn't even know you had, because you can go through life not being aware that you have an attachment to people, places, things.
Yes.
And it's not until you start to die from that ego that you realize, well, I had no idea how attached I was to people, places, things. And have you experienced that?
Definitely. But there's also a release that comes with it, I think.
And what type of release?
There's an emotional release. I think, again, if we're looking at it in terms of physics and two energies have to match, let's say perhaps your energy is a bit different, but you're dragging that energy along with you, and you release that attachment for your own benefit or the greater good,
Yeah.
you've essentially dropped weight and baggage, and that can be very shocking to see how much more energy you might
But
have.
it can also happen in marriages
Yeah.
where husband and wife don't relate anymore. Well, they never related in
the
reality.
first place.
Right. So how many times have you died of the ego?
I don't know.
From
it's
the
a good
ego.
question. I think there are mini ego deaths, and then there are macro ego deaths. So it might be one thought pattern, or it might be an entire concept of yourself and life, or things that you were told that you then find out 30, 40 years later, this one thing that was just beaten into me isn't true. And that's very hard to let go of negative thoughts. It's part of you.
Yeah.
And that's the demon.
I want to ask you this. There are men and women who go to Alcoholics Anonymous program, drug programs.
Right.
And they walk into the program and they say, my name is John Doe and I'm an alcoholic. And everybody applaud and like, right on.
Right on.
And then some people get up and say, my name is Ma, and I've been off drugs for 5 days. And people are like, yeah, right on, right on. And then they assign a person to you.
Sponsor.
Right. Is that good to do that?
Absolutely.
And why?
I think, well, you're vocalizing a truth, and when you bring something to light, even to strangers, God is seeing that, and Satan hates for things to remain hidden. So I think any environment in which you can share your demons, you're bringing it to light, and once the light hits that truth, things do start to shift.
But when you identify yourself as a drug addict, as an alcoholic,
Right, that label, taking
as
that
a
in.
lesbian,
Right.
or as a homosexual, or as a whatever,
Very
a
label heavy.
murderer, rapist, whatever they do, when you identify yourself as that, you become that.
You're reinforcing something.
Because it's really not you, it is the ego that made a home in you. So should people identify themselves as that? Because as long as you identify it as you, you're never going to get over it.
It's very tricky. So if I were an alcoholic, you know, you go through the motions of these programs and procedures, but I think it's very important to disidentify with labels.
Yeah,
That's just
absolutely.
their way of doing things. So I would go and say, okay, I know that this is their way of doing things. This is the script. Here are the benefits. Take what I want and leave the rest.
But most people don't know that, though. They believe that they're what they say they are. And when you have them stand up and saying, this is who I am, they never get over it. And then you assign a person to them, a sponsor, and that person confirm it. You're late at night, oh, I feel like I want to drink, whatever they do. And the person, okay, go drink. You never get over the not you if you keep identifying with it.
The identity part is tough. And again, I think that, you know, the program is the program. I do think it saves lives, but there has to be a conscious awareness around the words that you're speaking. And I think perhaps some sponsors feel exactly the way that you feel, but the program is so strong and widespread that the benefits, I think, outweigh what you're talking about. But I think that incantation, that incantation is dangerous.
Do you have fear?
Generally or specifically?
do you ever experience fear, you?
I do, yeah.
You do. And is that fear from within?
No.
You feel it within yourself?
It's never from within.
And how do you have it then if it's not from within? What do you mean?
Well, everything that we bring into us, it doesn't necessarily start, at birth. Fear is a thought form, a thought pattern. So as we pick up more and more thought patterns, they turn into fear. So what I do with that is break down what are the words behind this, where did they come from? And again, the mind is designed to keep us feeling safe. So it's a war to dismantle any negativity that kept us safe when we were young, and then break that down as a fear and understand that it's producing a false feeling within us.
It's amazing how this time is going by so fast. I have so many things to ask. Have you surrendered? Are you a Christian?
Yes.
You are a Christian. And have you surrendered to God?
I think I surrendered to God a long time ago, but it's a reaffirmation process. I did have an adult baptism in January of this past year to, re-immerse myself in the philosophical context of the Bible.
And what does it mean to surrender to God to you? What does that mean?
It's never your own will. It's never your own will. I'm trying to think of how to explain this. Anytime there's resistance, it's your will, but with a lack of resistance, that's God's will.
Resistance to what?
Anything.
Can you give me an example of an anything resistance?
Resistance to somebody not wanting to be in your life, perhaps, and wanting to know why, and wanting to pursue that. It could be a family member,
That's
friend.
That's a good example.
Romantic partnership, whatever it might be.
Yeah. So if someone don't want to be in your life, you just say, okay, fine.
It is the greatest lesson. Rejection is protection. God has removed something from you, and your resistance in allowing that just because you don't understand it.
But how about if you feel pain to that loss? You really want that person in your life, and you feel pain to losing that person, so you try to go after it. Is that a sign not to do it? Not to go after that person? Or let him go, let her go?
Chasing things that have left your life or your field is dangerous.
Yeah, I totally believe that.
It's so dangerous.
I can see that, yeah.
That's going against God for ego purposes.
Yeah.
Because your ego is telling you need to fix something.
That is so true. Do you believe that you can completely die from the ego and have no ego at all?
I mean, if I get hit by a bus outside after this, I won't have any more ego. But I think while we're incarnate, we always have a degree of ego.
I want to talk quickly about the mother curses and son husbands.
Oh, That's a great one.
You have a blog post on how to know if you're cursed. And you write that a curse is any state in which we do not feel free. Explain that.
Well, I think the last example of pursuing that in a resisted, fashion, we're not free. We're beholden to our own mind and desires of how we think things should be. Another example would be a false belief, that we have about ourselves. So a brainwashing or belief imposed upon us by a parent that was designed to control us for selfish purposes, that's a stronghold. And until you reject that, which is part of an ego death, you're not free. You're essentially living under a curse. Now, however that person became demonized is another story. But they have demonized you by imposing their will. And children are just open vessels. They're receptive to everything.
This is why children become like their mothers. They take on the same identity as the mother.
It's a sign to them. It's a sign to them.
Do you have anger?
Sometimes.
You get angry at times?
I was angry about my censorship.
About your what?
my censorship.
What do you mean?
Not being allowed to use certain social media platforms.
Oh, I see what you're
all
saying.
of that. That made me quite angry, being silenced.
So is anger the nature of the devil or the nature of God?
It can be both. It can be either. It
So
depends.
What do you mean by God has anger, you think?
I think there's a healthy anger, which is it's an alert. It's a red light to let you know that something is off, and that you need to dig deeper and to understand. Anger from a resisted state of I want, and I can't have, why not? That's the devil. It's contextual. Anger is contextual. God gives us anger as a warning sign, as an appropriate response.
But I've recognized that God gives us discernment. Are you calling the God-given anger discernment?
Absolutely.
Oh, I see.
Right.
You give an example of a young man being controlled and dominated by his mother, and you call this the ultimate and most evil stronghold in existence. Mm-hmm. When a young man is being dominated by his mother, what do you mean by that? How is that the most evil?
Well, that individual is being moved in as a surrogate husband. So they're placed in a role at an age where they have no reference to anything intellectually mature. So it's an emotional incest of sorts. And that piece of them that is supposed to grow organically and naturally is taken and it's used to meet some unmet needs. And then that person evolves into an adult missing that natural, order of intellectual, emotional, spiritual, intimate evolution. How are you going to place yourself in society without that?
I've noticed that there are mothers who prefer their sons as their husband as opposed to their husband as their husband.
All the time.
Are the mothers aware that they're doing this?
Some of them, I think, who are inherently evil. Others are unconscious, and children are malleable. So they're able to, assign qualities and behaviors that are lacking in their relationship.
And are the sons aware that their mothers have made them into their boyfriend or husband?
Not until they're older and they're still living at home, 25, 30, 40, 50.
Yeah.
Not forming relationships with women.
Yeah, I'm aware
Happens
of
all
that
the time.
too. Yeah, I see it all the time.
And they trap them. They want them around.
And how can a son overcome that? What should he do to get away from that?
I really think there needs to be a crisis of sorts in his life first to even question. A lot of people get trapped. I think in plain terms, move away as far as you can.
For mama?
Yeah, and rebuild your life.
But she'll move there too. If you move to West Hell, she'll move to West Hell to keep her with you.
Not if you don't tell her where you're going.
So, Do your mother have that personality?
My mother doesn't have sons,
Oh, I see.
so
And does she try to control you or your sisters or anyone? You have sisters?
I do. I think all parents insert their own agenda, especially if they were younger,
Yeah.
when they had children, and they impose that onto their children for sure.
Amazing. One other thing I want to get to really fast. You write that evil is someone who lies to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They are aware of the lie. They would eat. That means they would die of the lie. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, look what's going on out there
What
right
a
now.
mess.
Right?
Yeah.
But they're committing, it is just so convenient to believe a particular truth. And in lying to yourself, you get sick, you have all of these things that happen because you're at war. Your soul's at war with your thoughts. You're not aligned.
Yeah.
It's like something's broken. Sorry, what was your initial question? I
And,
kind of spaced out on that.
Oh, I forgot already.
Lying to yourself.
Yeah.
The
You lied to yourself and they would die for those lies.
Because it's hard. It's hard to become conscious and true because then you have the ego
Oh,
death,
I know what
right?
I want to ask. And when you say be true, is it necessary to tell the world what's wrong, or at least be honest within yourself that, hey, I'm lying to myself, or blah, blah, blah? You don't have to tell someone else. Do you just need to be aware yourself that you're lying to yourself?
I think it comes in tandem, usually through interactions with other people. Something is provoked within you to make you aware. I mean, I can think of an example. I had someone reach out to me last year, someone I had worked with, and they said, Elaine, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that that I didn't believe you about what was going on politically and otherwise with all of this agenda. And they said specifically, I just didn't want to believe it. It was just too hard. Because in doing that, like you said earlier with an ego death, your landscape changes. Your friends change, family members change, your job changes. And it's people don't want to be alone. They fear abandonment more than they fear death. So that's why people lie to themselves.
That's amazing. It's amazing to me how rough, how hard the ego death is. It's really hard.
It's crushing.
Yeah. So I got to ask, and then I got to put you in the hot seat. Do you believe in that order of God and Christ, Christ and man, man over woman, and woman over children?
I think it's contextual. So there is a spiritual way of looking at that, and then there's a basic, tangible human way of looking at that can be perceived as dogmatic or sexist, if that makes sense.
So do you believe in it, though, in that order?
I believe that is how we have been designed spiritually, and then it is up to us how to translate that in our day-to-day lives, and it gets taken out of context, which is why people have this aversion to religion and Christianity. It's what we do with a natural spiritual order.
Are you married?
No, I'm not married.
Have you ever been married?
I've never been married.
And I don't like doing ifs because we don't know the situation we're in it, right?
Right.
But would you obey your husband and be under him? He would be over you, the head of you. Would you accept that?
When you say over me,
Like he's the head, the man is the head of the woman. Would you accept that?
in what context?
Period. Like, this is my husband. He's over me. I'm going to obey him.
In all contexts?
Yes.
So can you just give me a few examples? I just need to know.
You don't know what it means to be obedient to your husband?
Generally speaking, I think the masculine energy is there. We're like the receivers, and that's the masculine energy is the provider and the protector. So in that sense, it makes perfect sense.
Would you obey him?
To oblige. I think we obey each other.
But would you obey your husband?
Can you give me any examples?
Should a man...
Generally speaking, I hope I would find someone that I was absolutely, comfortable with obeying. That would make life very easy for me.
It really would. Should a man ever obey a woman?
In what sense?
Period. Should a man ever take advice from a woman?
Well, advice, feminine intuition, perhaps.
I gotta throw you on the hot seat. I gotta heat this up and throw you on the hot seat.
No.
All right.
The hot seat.
Do you love the Great White Hope?
What is the Great White Hope?
I'm sorry?
What is the Great White Hope?
Oh, Donald Trump, the President Trump.
Oh, he should be our president right now.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Whiskey or tequila?
Whiskey.
In one word, describe Kamala Harris.
Nothingness.
Michael Jackson or Prince?
Prince.
Should a woman be allowed to vote?
Yes.
Is sex love?
No.
Is it possible to have perfect love? Perfect peace?
Perfect peace?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Is love of money the root of all evil?
No.
Do you believe in reincarnation?
Yes.
Is the earth flat?
No.
Do you support abortion?
No.
What is a man?
What is a man? Provider, protector.
Do you love white people?
Do I love white people? I love people. If they're white, that's cool.
Do you love white people?
Sure.
Did you have fun?
I had so much fun.
Thank you so much for coming on.
I'm so grateful you had me.
Yeah, it's good to have you. I enjoy that.
Thank you so much.
Tell the folks how to get in contact with you, read your writing, your blogs, and all those good things.
So all the writing that you mentioned, healingelaine.com is my website. I have a shop page. I also have a Substack, so healingelaine.substack.com. Those are probably the best ways to find me.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you all for tuning in. I absolutely appreciate it. Don't forget to like, follow, tweet, subscribe, ring the bell, check out our merch, and I appreciate it. Have a good one. Thank you.